Hello, and welcome to the second annual Trapped in a Locker Halloween Spooktacular. Last year's video was a discussion on the slasher trend remake of the early 2000s and how well they handled their killer. This year is a discussion on the potential for a cinematic universe with the classic Universal horror monsters. I am your host, Trapped in a Locker. And excuse me for 1 second. Oh, jeez, gosh. Really need to learn to chew my food. So I have a love for the classic black and white Universal monsters. They're iconic. They're they set the bedrock for everything that came afterwards. And if you really want to be technical and stretch the definition a little bit, they're the very first cinematic universe of all time. And that's pretty impressive to think about. What's not impressive, though, is that Universal has been trying and failing consecutively for the last decade, decade and a half, 2 decades maybe, to start up a cinematic universe of dark Universal monsters and failing drastically. The latest was the 2017 Mummy. Dracula Untold was meant to start an entire series around that. The Wolfman had hopes of setting off a sequel film. Van Helsing was meant to spiral into much bigger projects, bringing back more of the classic Universal monsters. And it's honestly just kind of sad to see because I really feel like these monsters deserve a chance on the big screen. Because with the technology we have now, we could really master and show just what these creatures are capable of. So I'm going to break this video into two halves. The first half is going to be me talking about how I personally would structure a dark cinematic universe of the monsters. I have created 5 specific movies, each relating to one of the big ones in the Universal monsters, and it's going to act as a sort of phase 1. If I feel like it, maybe next year I'll do like a couple small videos, obviously not another big sequel video to this, but maybe I'll do some small videos going over like a phase 2, phase 3. And then the second half is going to be whether or not we actually need this cinematic universe. Like, what would having this cinematic universe really do for us right now? So, let's break into part 1. How would I structure a dark universe? So, the first thing I was thinking about when I was coming up with this idea is the overall identity of the cinematic universe. There's a lot that can be done with just like the setting, the tone, all of that. Like, despite how great horror and comedy can work together, I don't think that these movies should inherently be funny. Remember, at the time of these movies coming out, these were the scariest things imaginable. These were some of the most, like, traumatic things you could show to somebody back then. Like, yes, nowadays we're desensitized to it and all that, but, like, you know, it's it's been over 100 years. You're gonna have some changes in viewpoints by that point. So, the first thing I want to do is come up with like the overall time period and setting, which can do a lot more for this series than you might actually think. Because in reality, the modern times kind of suck for horror. Like, we've got phones in our pocket. I live in America. Almost everybody has a gun in America. If you don't have a gun, you probably got a knife or a bat or something. Like, there is so much in the modern world that makes horror movies just completely impossible anymore. So, my first idea was not to set it in the modern world. These movies take place, well, the books, more accurately, the books that these movies were based on, like Dracula, Frankenstein, The Invisible Man, are in like the late 1800s, early 1900s kind of thing. So I was thinking, set the movie there. Give this cinematic universe its own time period, its own identity through that. Because there's so many modern day movies and crap. Just every cinematic universe, with the exception of, I think, what, the Conjuring verse takes place around like the 70s or 80s, all take place in the modern day. You've got this, the Marvel, you've got DC, you've got the legendary Monsterverse, which I will never forgive them for not calling that the Kaijuniverse. That is a failure on their part, and they should be ashamed of themselves. But giving this time period, you would be paying both homage to the original movies, the original source material, and giving yourself an entire era of, like, what's the right words here? The late 1800s, early 1900s was a very transitional period in world history. Obviously, you had, like, the Industrial Revolution going on. There was a lot less beliefs in mysticism starting and beliefs in technology beginning. Like, yes, you still had people like, say, Lovecraft, who were afraid of everything technological and advancing, but at the same time, you had a lot of people embracing that technical stuff and moving forward, which resulted in their own kinds of monsters. Like Frankenstein's monster. And yes, I do have the entire collection of the Universal Turtles. They're great. I love them so much. But Frankenstein's monster was an entire premise about what happens if you take science too far. And I feel like incorporating all of that with the battle of, like, mysticism and science would be a very interesting concept to kind of explore. So I feel like that time period would be great. Then I thought about, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did all these movies in black and white? And then I realized that was a bad idea. Look, black and white movies still get made today, and they can be great because you can use them with practical effects, and they kind of cover up any, like, bad practical effects you might have. And when it comes to horror, you always use practical effects over CGI because it lasts longer, it looks better, and it's just objectively more interesting. Like, look at the 1980 thing versus the 2011 thing. And that being said, though, like, no, not all these movies would be in black and white because that would just be obnoxious after a while. Speaking of which, there we go, all better. So, now that we've got the idea for the tone, the setting, all of the thematic stuff out the way, what is the first movie in this series going to be? This was one I wrestled with for a while because I first thought, oh, Dracula, he's the most iconic, obviously he should be the first one. And then it occurred to me, like, in the original Dracula novel, we know nothing about Dracula. And so many of the modern, like, interpretations of Dracula try and give us way too much of his backstory. So I decided that that wasn't a good idea. And I figure Dracula should be the Thanos of this series. Like, Dracula should be the final big bad that you have to face at the end of the game, right? So, if Dracula is going to be the first one, then the next one obviously would be the Wolfman, right? Because werewolves are cool as hell. And then I kind of remembered, like, we had a werewolf movie, or we had a Wolfman movie, like, 10, 13 years ago. People might still be fresh in people's minds, given how it wasn't super great. I would rather go with someone who hasn't been in the spotlight for a while. And if you've been paying attention, a couple minutes ago I did more or less just spoil it. We're going to go with Frankenstein. And I have a perfectly interesting idea as to why. So the movie's going to follow Victor Frankenstein as he's obviously assembling the monster. But he learns, like, different kinds of science and magic and starts mixing the two together to create the monster. And that attracts the attention of Dracula, who wants to utilize that magic and that power to revive the dead for something that we don't know yet. It's important not to give away the details in the first movie. The end of the movie will have Victor Frankenstein being killed by Dracula, but his monster being revived and born as like the post-credit scene. So you have the potential for a sequel. The second movie I thought of, I decided to go with The Wolfman. Because, yes, there was, the Wolfman movie in 2011, and I just talked about how I didn't want to, like, that might still be in people's minds, but once you get, there hasn't been a Frankenstein movie in years, so once you get the money from the people who go and see the new Frankenstein, and they want to see the new Frankenstein, and you kind of establish after the fact, you don't lead them into this movie thinking, that there's a setting up for a cinematic universe, you start this movie as a Frankenstein movie. That way, even if at the end of it, you still get a good movie, even if you don't wind up getting that cinematic universe started. So the second this Wolfman movie, it ran into an immediate problem with me, and that was, how do we design the wolf? Do we keep it like the classic look, which is iconic, but frankly just god awful? Or do we go with the underworld route? And yeah, that should be self-explanatory. Underworld has some of the best werewolf designs of any movie series, period. Especially the first three. Blood Wars was a hit or miss, but the first three especially slapped when it came to the werewolf designs. Like, those things were so cool. So this Wolfman story is going to be like, obviously, the origin. I'm going to set him up to be more of an anti-hero in this one, where he has to battle with like the feral beast inside of him because he doesn't want to like succumb to the werewolf plague. He doesn't want to become a werewolf. And I think it's important to note that the main theme of this is going to be like primal instincts versus like modern expectations, sort of a Jekyll and Hyde situation. Because Jekyll and Hyde, as of right now, in my version of Phase 1, is not going to be in this series. So the main story I've come up with for the Wolfman is like, he's going to be in a city in like somewhere, and he's keeps losing control every night on the full moon, and eventually he just decides like it's no longer worth the risk. He's being like, they're starting to go on alert, they're starting to hunt for him, they're starting to attack him. He needs to leave, he needs to run. So his choice is to escape into the woods, right? And then the post-credits scene is going to show him running into Dracula, who offers him a chance to learn to completely control the werewolf form, because that's not what he was capable of doing throughout this whole movie. He kept turning, and he kept going completely feral and attacking people and hurting people and killing people. So you have an establishment of Frankenstein's monster with antagonism to Dracula, and you have the Wolfman established as an ally, sort of, to Dracula. So we move on to the third movie. And this is where things get interesting. The third movie, I want to bring in the Invisible Man. That's right. Because I want the third movie to finally introduce what I'm liking to call, I haven't come up with a name for it yet, but it's Van Helsing's organization. Like, this movie brings in Van Helsing, more or less. So you've got 3 movies with Van Helsing in them before you reach, well, counting the finale to Phase 1. And I had the best idea for this. This movie is a spy thriller. That's right. So the Invisible Man joins whatever Van Helsing's organization would wind up becoming. And it's full of like priests and scientists. It's kind of like what Van Helsing's was in, the Van Helsing movie from 2004. And in this organization, they're like developing a serum to turn people invisible because they need someone to infiltrate Dracula's lair and try and attack Dracula. They want to try and strike Dracula before they can. Or before he can strike them. And that's more or less what it is. He infiltrates the castle. He's more or less sneaking past vampires, zombies, like whatever kind of crap you'd find in your typical Castlevania game as he's trying to find where Dracula's at. The ending is going to be like, obviously he does not succeed. They think he's dead. Like, they attack him because the potion wears off. And then it's revealed in the post-credit scene that he survived because they gave him a second potion that kind of like more or less acts as a pseudo-death, stopping his heart enough for the vampires not to notice, or stopping his heart enough for the vampires to think he's dead and then reviving him a short time after the potion wears off. But now he's trapped in Dracula's castle. And then the fourth movie, okay, I have an idea for the fourth movie, and that is going to be establishing what exactly Dracula wants and why he needs Frankenstein's monster. This movie is going to be, instead of just Frankenstein, this movie is going to be Frankenstein's monster. It'll act as a sequel to the first one, but also continue onwards. So Frankenstein's monster is kind of just wandering the countryside trying to survive, all the while being attacked by random vampires and crap. But because he's so incredibly strong, he can fight them off, but he doesn't have any like powers or anything in this version. And eventually has a run-in with Van Helsing, who immediately wants to attack him thinking he's some sort of undead golem from Dracula, but soon learns that this creature has intelligence, and this creature is the reason why Dracula's been like so active lately. So yeah, like that's the entire thing. And this entire story is meant to set up Dracula's endgame goal of reviving the mummy, who is an undead pharaoh who has incredible magic power and could help Dracula completely conquer the world. And that's why this is a very, very like important thing to keep Frankenstein's monster away from Dracula, because Frankenstein's monster, whether he knows it or not, has the key to reviving the mummy. And then we reach the final movie, the fifth movie in Phase 1. And it's going to be Dracula versus the Wolfman. And this movie's going to start with like the Wolfman being sent out on a mission to completely slaughter a village because they refuse to pay tribute to Dracula, which is going to start causing a wedge between their relationship because the Wolfman does not want to kill them, but if he does not kill them, Dracula punishes him with silver. And it's a very painful thing to watch. But the final, like, halfway through the movie, he's going to meet the Invisible Man, who's been, like, basically survival gaming through the entire store, through the castle for the last couple months. And they're going to, like, he's going to talk to him and explain about the organization to him and help him break out. And it's going to result in a fight between Dracula and the Wolfman. And this is where we learn that one of Dracula's biggest weaknesses is werewolf venom. Yes, I'm taking that directly from the Van Helsing movie because I think it's kind of cool. And it's going to result in a massive fight between Dracula and Wolfman, where Dracula is beaten back into one of his coffins, where he has to lay low and revive and like slowly build back up his revival and body and crap. But all the while still commanding his like vampire legion to attack the entire countryside. And then the ending is going to have the Wolfman meeting up with Van Helsing, Frankenstein's monster, and then we'll name drop Jackal as like the next person they're going for to tease the second, phase 2. What do you guys think? Is that an interesting idea for a cinematic universe? Did I take too long explaining it? Let's move on to the second part of this video, and that's, does this cinematic universe really need to exist? Alright, so if you just watch this whole video for whatever reason, maybe you like Universal Monsters, maybe you thought the title was interesting. Either way, you probably think I have a very high opinion on whether or not they should make a cinematic universe of the classic monsters. Well, unfortunately, I don't think they should. And my reason for that's very simple. It's that both of these movies behind me, Invisible Man over on this side, and then Renfield over on this side, took the classic Universal monster and they added a modern twist. They created a whole new original creature inspired by it, and it's genuinely fantastic. I don't think these monsters should be part of a cinematic universe, simply because I'd love to see what a director could do with them individually. I don't think they need to be put as just a stepping stone. Like, we don't need a Jekyll and Hyde movie just to be a stepping stone to an Invisible Man movie, or a Dracula movie stepping stone to a Mummy movie. Like, these monsters work so well in their original context of the books or whatever was the inspiration, simply because they were the threat. Like, Dracula is not a threat because he's trying to revive a mummy that can take over the world with magic. The same way that the Invisible Man isn't a threat because he's trying to infiltrate Dracula's castle. I kind of screwed up. I mean, I'm a good guy. That kind of killed my analogy. But the characters are a threat because they are a monster. The fact that you can easily imagine all of these creatures living in the same world and existing. We've been doing it for hundreds of years. But I don't think a cinematic universe is the best way to explore that kind of idea. Maybe a book series or something would be better, because each one wouldn't need to be a stepping stone to the next one. But overall, I just don't think a cinematic universe for these guys should work. And I would think that it's probably time we stop trying and we just start giving the characters to talented directors and letting them utilize them for their own stories. Like, it was actually the 2020 Invisible Man that made me realize that these characters still have a potential in the world as we know it. Because you can take a classic monster that represents one thing, add a modern twist to it, and have it represent something completely different. Like, the original Invisible Man in the book was meant to represent, similar to Frankenstein's monster, the overall dangers of science. What could happen if one person takes science too far and it drives them insane? It's a very interesting premise. It's a classic premise. It's something we've been dealing with for hundreds of years. But the 2020 Invisible Man says, what if we take a genius and we turn him into a narcissistic psychopathic stalker and give him the ability to turn invisible? It's a more modern threat, and I'm sure several people, men and women alike, can relate to having a creepy stalker who just won't leave them alone. And it's a very interesting idea to take the character because it's probably the best way to do it in a modern day. And I would kill to see some more monsters get that kind of treatment. Like, I would love to see what a modern day Frankenstein could be like. I'd love to see what a modern day Jekyll and Hyde could be like. For example, I actually I like to write in my free time. I don't know if I consider myself a writer as of yet. I don't have anything published. I haven't even really sat down and finished a book. But I had an idea for a novel based around Jekyll and Hyde, which basically took the premise of Jekyll and Hyde and turned it into a metaphor for losing oneself to addiction and identity problems. And the fact that you can take a premise like Jekyll and Hyde, which is as simple as just a evil personality, more or less, and turn it into something like that is a fantastic thing. The fact that we can look at these classic monsters for what they were, put them in a modern day setting, and turn entirely their thematics, and it's fantastic. I would love to see some more movies like that. Like, I know we're getting a remake of Nosferatu, I believe next year or in 2025. Technically, that's not a universal monster, but I count him because why not? Nosferatu is pretty scary. Like, I saw the movie the first time at 18, and it was pretty intense for a silent film, I'm not going to lie. It's also got one of the most iconic shots in movie history with the shadow of Nosferatu coming up the stairs, which was a fantastic shot. I wonder if they'll do that in the remake, but that's that topic for another time. But there's been talk about an Invisible Woman movie. There's been attempts at trying to get another Dracula movie started, I've heard. Well, not another Dracula movie. We've had two already this year with Renfield and Voyage of the Last Demeter. And frankly, it would be fantastic to see, like, more of these monsters solo, because nowadays so much tries to cram itself into being a cinematic universe. You've got Marvel, DC, the Legendary Universe, the Conjuring verse. Like, there's just so much going on with cinematic universes, and it's just not like we don't need another one. After a while, these get kind of stale and they start to pander out. Like the Conjuring universe, from my understanding, has more or less stopped functioning because that people have stopped caring about the like side projects and crap and only go see the Conjuring movies. Marvel's been floundering around since Endgame, which is unfortunate, and DC has been doing what DC does for the last like 10-ish years. Um, but I'm not 100% against the idea of a cinematic universe. Like, if you could get a Kevin Feige or a James Gunn involved who would be able to make like a decent cinematic universe out of it, I'd be down for it. My only big problem is like I said, I feel like these monsters work better solo. They need to be the solo antagonist. And paying lip service to like Phantom of the Opera without actually caring about Phantom of the Opera and just using it as a stepping stone for like whatever, that's kind of disingenuous because it is an interesting story. All of these stories were written at one point in time because the writer wanted to tell them, and they've withstood the test of time because people want to hear them. And that's the kind of thing that cinematic universes don't truly provide. A lot of times movies feel like they get made just because, the cinematic universe demands it. Look at Iron Man 2. Iron Man 2 is the biggest example for Marvel pre Phase 4, and it's not great. It's not fantastic. It's kind of just like, hey, Iron Man was a big thing. We need some cash on hand to get the next movie financed. Let's just throw in some random characters. And it kind of like undermines a lot of the important elements to the character, the story, and all of that. Just creating a cinematic universe, or just creating a movie for a cinematic universe because you need the money for the next movie, kind of sucks. Like that's not even a question. That's a terrible choice to do. And I'd hate to see a cinematic universe for these movies get off the ground and they do like Frankenstein, Wolfman, Dracula, Van Helsing, Phantom of the Opera, Bride of Frankenstein, and then like all of a sudden the money starts to run dry. So they're like Dracula 2, Dracula 3, Helsing 4. Like no one wants that. Like no one wanted any of that. And it would be very disingenuous to the fans of these characters. And I know I'm not the only one who's a fan of these creatures. These movies have persisted for so long because people like them, because people watch them, because people respect the classics for what they are. And it would be very disingenuous to those fans to just be like, hey, here's a second Dracula movie where we introduce, I don't know, Nosferatu or whatever. And all it does is just like, yeah, it's just there for money. It's just pandering. So those are just my thoughts, though. Maybe it could work, maybe it couldn't work. Who knows? With that being said, though, it's time we wrap this video up. We've been at this for a while, and I'm sure you guys are probably bored with hearing me talk. I will see you guys in the next video. Stay spooky.